Hello and welcome back to The Halfway Point. Today's episode is one area I think will resonate with pretty much every practice manager listening. Because if there's one thing that's constantly causes headaches in primary care, it's the Rota. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Phil to talk about Tempo, which is a GP Rota software, but it's more than that. It's aiming to bring in some much needed clarity and control to the workforce planning. So thank you, Phil, for joining us today. And if you can start by introducing yourself and tell us a bit about Tempo and how it came about.
Thanks, Ben. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to be with you. And so my name's Phil Varlick. I'm a GP by background, GP partner. So I've been a GP partner for more than 17 years or so, and come from Sussex. So, and I in GP practice in Lewes, which is just outside Brighton. And so we've been involved in trying to manage a large GP practice, as I was originally in a practice of 8,500 patients and then led the merger of three practices to become what's now Foundry PCN, single practice PCN. And that was a kind of a 5-year program of merging. It really made me realize the complexity of what goes on in primary care. Interesting how that ended up coming down to rotaring as being a key thing. And I think, to be honest, most of us really don't appreciate what a rota does or quite how complicated it is and all the things that are trying to be brought together, because it's really trying to manage all of your resources in one place. And it's the expression of your staff outcomes, staff happiness. Can people get leave when they want? It's an expression of patients in terms of getting the appointments that they need and all the finance. So is our practice profitable? So all of those things are kind of coming together. Now, as I merged together the three practices in Lewes, that's when it became really complicated. And so we went to a size of an organisation with 120 staff, and I was pretty good at spreadsheets, if I might say so myself, but reached the kind of limits of possibilities of that. And I think we understood all of the errors that kind of happen then. So when you're trying to manage lots of different staff types, you're trying to manage leave, you're trying to manage where they are, things go wrong. And I think that's where we then came around to think about creating a product, because there wasn't actually something that was out there that was able to manage the complexity of primary care.
Right. Yeah. So that's really interesting, because I was just thinking about those who are listening who are still relying on the spreadsheets, like you mentioned, or even manual systems. Kind of, what was it that prompted you to then start actually looking at a Rota software as opposed to just struggling through and managing on those spreadsheets and the manual processes?
Yeah, so I think it came around about trying to get the practice to work more efficiently was my first goal. So as I was clinical director and as a partner, it was about how do I get the most out of my organisation? So how do I get the most efficient way of producing appointments? And first of all, that was with GPs. But then it was thinking about what do our nurses do? What do our HCAs do? And then as we became a primary care network, and I'm sure most of us have got all these other roles. So we've got paramedics, we've got physiotherapists, we've got care coordinators, we've got social prescribers. And it actually makes you think, well, how do I make best use of them? So where is it worth having two social prescribers instead of a GP? Where is it worth having an advanced nurse practitioner or a paramedic? And what's that right balance of that? And then when you work through that, it becomes, well, how does that work at Christmas when most people want to be on holiday? How does that work in half term? What does that mean for summer holidays? Because when you were just GPs working together, you could cover each other. You all do the same work. So if you went on holiday, well, you go and we'll just need this number of people to be off. But as soon as you start to add in that other layer of, well, only certain people can do certain things, so a paramedic can do certain things, an AMP can do certain things, you then have to start thinking a lot more carefully about how they work together, how many people need to be around on each day of the week, what happens on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then have something that enables you to manage that, so that you can make sure that people are taking leave, meaning that you, one, aren't getting too stressed because you've got too many people off at the same time, which I think is a big one that lots of people, come back to again and again to say, why did we have so many people off? Surely somebody thought about that, but then you come to the day and you're struggling through. So I think that's one of the key ones, is about how many people can be off and still be safe and do that in a managed way. But then when you haven't got enough, then making sure that you're not spending too much on locums. So if you can use your internal staff better, and actually, interestingly, start to look for those opportunities when you've got less people on holiday. So when there's less people on holiday, you can do more of the stuff that you might not do at other times. So a bit more minor surgery, a bit more coil clinics, a bit more something else, but also catch up with some of the proactive work. So be a lot more mindful about that planning part of it. And when you're doing that in spreadsheets, it's almost impossible to kind of manage all of that in one system.
Yeah, to visualize it almost, and see it in action. I think those who in a practice who oversee the rotas probably know the answer to this, but just for those that don't, how much time do you typically see practice managers or whoever it is in the practice spending on rota planning before using a system like Tempo?
Yeah, so we did a bit of a time and motion study looking at kind of how much time we thought was being spent within our practice and that was, large practice, 28,500. So I think each week we've got at least sort of 10 hours worth of planning of rotas just for GPs, equivalent sort of length of time for nurses and HCAs and non-GPs. And then we've also got reception planning that goes on. So don't forget those, as well as
of course,
administrative staff. And I think reception is often ignored in this because they're just as critical on a daily basis. In fact, more critical, because we need to have to make sure that you've got everybody there on the phones, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and have the right number through the day. So it's really, they're even more important, I would say, to rota appropriately than the clinical staff. So the amount of time, and I think it's time that you don't recognize, because it's often done by a group sometimes of people. So maybe a person who does the main rotoring, but then the practice manager gets involved. Often a senior GP gets involved. From the receptionist, there's a reception manager doing some of that. For the nurses, there's often a senior nurse. So there's far more time than you might imagine being put into that. And then alongside that rota planning is the planning that comes from leave. So responding to those leave requests, about responding to people, how many people can be off? Can I do this? Oh, I've got a wedding coming up, or just at last minute, I've got to go and do this thing, or this has got to happen. So that's constantly kind of going on. And so that's what causes the errors, because you've got all of these things coming in at different times. And then if you're trying to manage that all through spreadsheets, inevitably things go a bit wrong. And the only time when you come to realize it quite often is on the day. It's kind of like that moment, and you're like, oh.
I know that feeling. It's a horrible feeling, and you take it personally as well. It's I was doing the rota, I've messed this up, but it's like you said, there's a team, and it's easy to overlook things sometimes. So I think adding all that up together, then that's probably about a full-time, give or take, a full-time working week then.
Yeah.
Just on the rota, with all the staff involved and all the time it takes across each week. So I guess if you like, that's talking about how we got there, how we are where we are. The solution then, so looking at Tempo, at a high level really, how does Tempo work and what makes it different from these traditional rota planning tools?
Well, first of all, we spent a lot of time sitting with the people who've been doing this sort of work. So I spent a lot of time with Jill in my practice, who's our rota lead. But we've done this now through 20 other practices that we've been working with. And I've got utmost respect for what they handle. Absolute utmost respect. The number of different variables they're trying to bring together into a rota. It's amazing things don't fall down more often. It was taking that and then taking it down to the different elements of it. So understanding what those things are. And I thought it was going to be much easier. So when we started creating Tempo, I thought, oh, this should be easy. 6 months later, we should have something there. 4 years later, here we are, having gone into all of those depths of the little bits of it. And that relates to staff. What are their usual job plans? What do they normally do on each week? How does that differ when they're doing things like specialist clinics, like diabetes, minor surgery? How do we represent that? And how do we show that can come in and come out again? So it's the people's job plans is one element of it. So that's what we term their user job plans or their user templates. And we line all of those up to have a look and see how many people have we got that would normally do this work. But we also then look and say, well, how does that work differently at Christmas? Or how does that? So we create a slightly different job plan, which has got a week determinant to it that tells you something different for different weeks of the year. And then against that, what we're doing is we're comparing what should we be doing. Now, the tradition is to say, oh, well, we can have 2 GPs off at the same time. But how many does that leave you with, more importantly? Because you're not actually interested in how many people can be off. What you're interested in, how many people are in doing the work. Now, with flexible careers now, everybody's working different days of the week. Everybody's doing different half days. So what we found was that, with 25 GPs in our organization, by the time you map them against each other, that's first of all the biggest kind of hurdle, is just to see that, understand what the workforce is visually across a week, and then look at comparing that workforce against what you're trying to do each day of the week. So look at the total number of on the day appointments that you need on a Monday, Tuesday. And now with a new contract, how much triage time do you need? So how much triage activity are you expecting to do? And how does that look different on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? And how might that change season to season? So you look at that on the day activity, the stuff that has to happen, and then you look at that balancing against your planned appointments and your specialist work, and then seeing where I can fit that back in. And doing that in a live way that then feeds back into asking people when they can be on leave and still leave enough people back in the practice. So we've got these leave dials now that tell us that. So we're actively planning. And interestingly, you can actually actively plan next year already, because you know what user templates have got.
True. Yeah.
You know what you think you're going to. And in fact, the best time to plan for this time next year is this time now, this year.
Right.
Because actually, you've just been through Easter. So what worked in Easter? What was good this week? Okay, so what worked well in terms of how many people did we have around? What were we trying to respond to? What was our demands? And what could we do different next year? So should we have a slightly different look at what happens towards year end? Because we were doing all that quaff stuff. Loads of people went on leave because we were coming up to the year end, and then loads of people ended up taking their last bits of leave at that time. So can we think about a slightly different way of approaching that? Doing something slightly different with our templates, with our plans. Also thinking about, would we want to do some recruitment, or would we want to change people's days of working? So would we say, maybe just nudge lots of little changes, that when you add them all up can make a massive difference. So a bit of shifting on the day activity to pre-bookable activity, a bit of changing that rota template within that to make a difference, a bit of, could you do Monday afternoons because you've been doing them on Tuesday so far, but it fits better on a Monday? We know that somebody's retiring in May, so shall we replace that with a partner or a salaried? So when you've got view of this, actually having that as a visualization and being able to see this in a very visual way with user templates, with what we're doing, dials, pluses and minuses, greens and reds, it gives you a place that you can start to do this very actively.
Are you a practice manager or experienced primary care leader who secretly enjoys sorting out chaos? You know the kind. The rota is falling apart, the inbox is out of control, and everyone is looking at you like, can you just fix this? And somehow you usually do. At Locum Practice Manager, we work with practices across the UK who need exactly that kind of support. Calm, capable people who can step in, take the pressure off and make things happen. Whether you're looking for a bit of variety, more flexibility, or just a break from the same four walls, this is your chance to use your skills where they are really needed. No fluff, no nonsense, just meaningful work, supporting real practices with a team that gets it. So if you have got the experience, the resilience, and maybe just a slightly unhealthy love of a well-organised action plan, we should talk. Head over to locumpm.co.uk to find out more. I think that's great, and that's one of the reasons I really like this as a. Well, I said earlier on, it's more than a software. It's not a Rota software on its exclusively, is it? It's managing the whole practice and the staff, acknowledging that, like you said earlier on, the GP Rota or any Rota actually across the GP practices isn't as simple as shift we've got to have covered. There's so much more to it than this. And I think one of the things that kind of leading on from that then is when you're setting up practices, is it a case of you set them up, give them the logins, there you go, or is it a process with Tempo? Is it a journey? How does that side of it work?
Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about rotoring, and specifically about kind of that rotoring. We've talked a little bit about leave and about that HR part of that.
Yeah,
we've also kind of got touch into the finance bit, because alongside this is what Tempo is doing, is linking together that finance bit, because within the rotas are all of the overtime and all of the sickness. So what Tempo is three elements really that come together, which is the rota, but the elements that need to be there alongside that is the HR, so automatically calculating how much leave you can have and showing you back that back to the staff members in a live way. And then also capturing all the finance elements. So what are people's salaries? So then you can produce a staff budget forecast, but also capture all the overtime as it happens and automatically feed that into a payroll adjustments report so that it can go through into your payroll. So those three things actually become one system. And actually in other industries, they call it an ERP, an enterprise resource planning platform. And so they're accounting software, but there hasn't really been this idea of this within medicine, within primary care, which is a single point of truth of where this is happening. That means errors don't happen, and being able to link it all together is where you then produce the business intelligence. So first of all, you save time because it's only being done once, and actually that's the staff users who are doing most of that work. So you reduce the admin time by over 50%. We totally integrate into system one, so touch of a button. So we can do something which otherwise for us was taking 2 hours in 2 minutes. So you're saving all of that time and you're producing business intelligence. Now, that is quite a lot. And so when we're talking about onboarding, what we've been trying to do, in particular over the last year in development, is trying to automate as much of that as possible. So what we did is we support practices, and what we've actually realized is the NWRS, the National Workforce Reporting Service, is the most standard place as a description of the first list of all of your staff that we import. Set people up with that. Then we can take data from your appointment system and help to create the templates for you, put that back into user templates, look at what you're doing. And then from the finance perspective, then take your information from your payroll system and put that together. And then we work with practices with a bit of advice and support around about any nuances that they currently have, because undoubtedly everybody's slightly different in the way they structure their rotas. So we have a whole load of kind of information, videos, but also we have a few regular meetings on the setup to get people to understand the system and try and translate any of the issues that they've got with their current rotating system into a more standardized approach and tempo. Because then once you're set up is when you get the big gains. So it's a bit of investment up front, and there's no doubt about that. I mean, it needs a little bit. It's because you're setting up, you're translating what was otherwise often in multiple spreadsheets into a system that's then manageable. But once you've done it, that's the game. So it's the investment up front. So 3 months, say, of probably, putting all of this on, depending on how much time, see any practice, at best, I think probably most people may have half or a day a week to put to this, a bit of time of transformation. So putting that time aside, get things up and running, and then you're away. And it's then at that point when you see people, seeing, eyes light up with a sudden realization about what's possible, what's feasible, the things you'd never seen before. And you start to see things from a different perspective. It brings together the viewpoints of the partners and the clinicians, the viewpoints of the practice managers, and the viewpoints of the HR. And you now start to get this ability to work so much more collaboratively together that you have control. And you gain trust in kind of what's going on in the rota rather than feeling like it's failing. So whereas before it's kind of everything always feels like something's going to go wrong or something's not, the next day or next week, what's next around the corner, what's the next thing we're going to have to pick up, to now being, well, I can see what's happening next week, next month, even next year. So I can put this viewpoint of this kind of workforce planning bit right into the next year.
I think just a few points to quickly clarify on. You mentioned System 1, but it does integrate, well, it works with EMIS, doesn't it? But it's just EMIS being EMIS. It's a slightly different process. Is that right?
Yeah. So with System 1, we've got a fantastic integration. There's a rota screen you can load things up on, and it literally just plonks it in. So it's and means you can do dynamic rotoring in that way. In EMIS, they don't have that same integration. Now we continue, and actually with EMIS X, they're doing some work we were having some discussions with them at Rewired actually about some of the stuff that's going on that we're going to be picking up. So we're hoping it's going to get there. At the moment, it's about creating those templates to the point where you can see them and mirror them in EMIS. So you can have a list of the things that you know that you need people to be doing, and you can then quite easily, and it takes, it's quicker than it was, but it's not as quick as a full integration. We've also had discussions with Medicus as well. So they're keen. And so if people would want to get in contact who are working with Medicus or thinking about doing that, we're also looking for first pilots to kind of do that work, because they've got, again, a very open API that we think that would fit very easily into, modern products. System 1, EMIS being older products, the integration side of things just isn't in the same way.
No, fair enough. And you mentioned about the setup process, implementation being about 3 months. To clarify, that's a little bit of time a week for about 3 months. You're not saying like 3 months worth of work in total.
Not at all. Just setting out expectations a bit, really. So
that's quite clarified.
But also it's about having something up front that you can use before that. So, 3 months would be to get everything up and running, but we can take that initial data and give you that viewpoint back on your practice immediately. So data insights showing you, we can take an appointment download from EMIS or from strategic reporting in System 1, show you kind of some of your demand and capacity by looking at previous appointments. And then we can take, as I say, that NWRS data, put that back together. And then, within a week, you can have some usable information that's there to do stuff with. And then you build, and I think the biggest hurdle is about taking existing Rota spreadsheets, and quite often the process of rotaring isn't all contained in there. So lots of practices have the nuances that are held in the heads of the people who do the process. So it's the rotaring staff, it's the practice managers, it's the GPs. So if you just take a spreadsheet, you only get half, if that, of the information of the story that's going on. So you take a bit of time to work with them and help them to put the information that they know that they're doing, that's in their heads, into the rules. And that says, on a Monday, this normally happens, but it could happen on a Tuesday. We've got minor surgery that happens on a Thursday, but it could also happen on a Monday. We normally flip that one to that one. Supervision, so making sure then that all the supervision set up. So is it 10 minutes per registrar that you normally do? Or is it 20 minutes per registrar? Or do you change that according to the experience of the registrar? Is it the partner who does the supervision or a salary doctor? So all of the bits that actually end up being done quite manually, once all of this is in the clinical system, once you take that outside and you set it up as a set of rules, actually it suddenly becomes this really kind of active, dynamic system that gives you so much information. It's amazing how much information it gives you from a planning perspective, looking, from QOF, how many appointments do I need? Will I get there this year? So you can get some of that data out of the clinical system or Arden's Manager or any of the other kind of data analytics tool. But does it actually tell you, have you got the staff to do it? And does it tell you on which days of the week you should be doing this in the next year in order to make sure you get to your QOF target?
Yeah. Got you. It's the whole practice planning tool for the year, as you said. And you mentioned Rewired there. So I gather this is a really exciting time for Tempo and yourself and the team, because you've recently been selected for the NHS Innovation Accelerator, the 2026 cohort. Firstly, congratulations. And secondly, kind of what does this mean for you as Tempo and as a team?
Yeah, well, thank you. We're really proud of getting onto the NIA programme. It's a long process, actually, getting on board to the NI programme. It's a 6-month application process where you have to submit a 38-page document setting out your business, about what it is, what it does, where you are in terms of a product, where you are with your customers. Once you get through that phase, there's an interview. And so then you have an interview with a panel of, I think it was a panel of 6 people who are business experts, both from healthcare and NHS. And then after that, you then have to go through a process where they actually look at the integrity of your business by looking at your accounts. They get somebody to test the software. So it goes into a massive amount of detail. And the reason being is it's a program that's designed to support the products around at this point in time in the NHS that they think are going to fulfill and make some improvements in the NHS that are live. And so it's really saying that as GP practice is emerging, so, we're all getting bigger. As we're now working together as primary care networks, as we're now starting to work together as neighbourhoods and federations, this is a live problem in primary care. We're being asked to now, fulfill 90% of our on the day. We're being asked to fulfill on the day triage. There's so much that's changed in primary care. So the recognition from the NIA is that we are the product. We've got a tool that really can support practices in this. So this is about the future of primary care, not just now. This is about, the next 5 years as we go through this neighbourhood change, and having then data analytics which feed back into a total workforce analysis and understanding and help things to progress. So it's been a fantastic achievement from all of our team, working together to get to this point, to show the software's ready, to show that we're ready, we've got this understanding. And having been through this journey ourselves of this is our design because of what we needed. So, we were a small practice, 8,500. We became this big behemoth, 28,500. And it was, how did we manage that? And we struggled. We went through a really, really tough time. I won't tell you how much we wasted on locums as we went through this transition process of merging.
Yeah.
And the challenges that we had around managing our finances, about the difficulty that we had about understanding that how we work together. And that was a lot about, who's got how many GPs versus nurses. How do we make sure when we come together, we've got the right amount? So this was born right out of our experience of having gone through that process. And I think that's what gives us some credit in terms of what our product is it comes right out of the known problems. And then we've had the benefit then of spending another 5 years going into lots of other practices who have been through that change and really seeing it from their viewpoint. And it's really interesting, lots of similar themes, but lots of things slightly different. So we've had to evolve and do lots of the HR, lots of the rotoring that becomes a universal solution rather than something that was just for us at Foundry.
Yeah, and I think the timing's brilliant. As we're a couple of years into the 10-year NHS plan, digital is kind of almost on every page of that plan. So I think a solution like this slotting in is perfect timing. If nothing else. But I think looking at where you are now and kind of where the company's grown, everything. What's next? What's next for Tempo over the next 12 months or so? Really, what's on the pipeline?
Yeah, well, we're already in practices from York through to Bristol, Birmingham, London, Sussex. So now we're looking at this next phase, which is about scaling, and that involves making the product and the onboarding process work better, automating all of that to come together. And also, I think what we want to do is we want to bring those organizations using Tempo together. Because I think there's a real opportunity here that once you're standardized on a system, you can share data, you can share information with who you want to say, what does good look like? So, what's good in your area? What's the right mix of nurses and HCAs, and how much income are you getting? Do you want to share that, or do you just want to share what the number of appointments that you've got? But you can have that opportunity so you can come together. So what we'd like to do is to create this kind of communities of practice around Tempo, get people to be sharing their information, share good ideas, share the best way of working. Yeah. And I think that's where we can all grow. I don't think enough of that goes on. I mean, certainly from my perspective, we're always quite a bit insular in terms of the way we look after our businesses and ourselves. And I think now's the time for us to expand that in this new world of neighbourhood working is to try and look out for those good examples. So if we can encourage that, that's my goal, is that we can do more of that, bringing people together, do more sharing about how you can use rotas. So rotoring actually being a tool, being the thing that you can optimize your business with, not being the thing that you have to give to somebody else to do because it's the worst job and it's really hard and it goes wrong and it's awful. Actually, let's celebrate the rota. The rota is where it all comes together. It's the thing that actually is the workings of your practice. And if you get it working well, you can improve patient outcomes, you can improve staff outcomes, and you can improve practice profit. You can do it. There's no doubt about this. We need the business intelligence to do that. So we need to come into this modern era from the NHS to learn from other commercial areas where they're doing this already. So say, look, there is loads of opportunity here to make your practice work more affordably, more profitably, at the same time as actually producing a better service.
Music to my ears, Phil. That's exactly kind of what I've been thinking about a lot over the last year or two. We're working together more, sharing ideas, bouncing off each other. If this kind of conversation resonates with anyone, we'll put the details for Tempo in the show notes. I guess if people are interested, give you a contact and then arrange a demo. Is that the best way forward?
Yeah, absolutely. If you put our website in the show notes, you can contact me on LinkedIn as well, Phil Varlick. You Google us, you'll find us, Tempo GP Rotoring. And on our website, we've got a book a demo, so you can have a look at some information on there and then book an appointment for us. We've also got a link through to other webinars that we've done. Lots of information there for people to have a little bit dip the toe into, and then if you're interested, give us a shout, and I'd love to show you more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phil. That's a lovely note to end on. So again, thank you, Phil, for joining me today. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Hope you have a good week, and we'll see you next time at the Halfway Point. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of The Halfway Point. We hope today's conversations has given you a fresh inspiration and practical ideas you can take straight back into your practice. You'll find all the links and resources we mentioned in the show notes at locampm.co.uk. The Halfway Point is available on all major podcast platforms in both audio and video formats, so you can tune in however suits you best. If this episode helped you, we would genuinely love to hear from you. Leave us a review or a comment. Not only does it make our day, it also helps us shape future episodes around what matters most to you. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you do not miss next Wednesday's episode. And if you know a colleague who would benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching for the Locum Practice Manager. We're on YouTube too, where we share practical tips and tutorials for primary care managers. Until next time, keep moving forward, keep improving, and we'll see you again next week at the Halfway Point.